The assassination of Grigori Rasputin is famous because it unfolded in a way that stubbornly refused to match the conspirators' expectations. Just like my love life, it is a story that has been retold many times, and in many different ways, with varying levels of exaggeration. In December 1916, a group of Russian nobles, most notably Prince Felix Yusupov, decided that Rasputin's influence over the imperial family had become intolerable. Their plan was tidy, discreet, and aristocratic. Lure him to a palace, poison him, and quietly remove a political problem. The stumbling block was, assassinations famously go wrong, and they didn't seem to have a concrete plan, or even a concept of a plan, on how to react when the shit hit the proverbial fan. And, according to Prince Yusupov, this shit definitely hit the fan. I mean, there was shit everywhere. On the walls, the carpets, the ceiling. Even some shit on that beautiful credenza Uncle Igor had given him for his birthday. The conspirators were a group of 5 men. Prince Felix Yusupov was directly connected to the Russian imperial family by marriage, which is why he could act with limited fear of real consequences. It was like being a very wealthy man who visited Epstein Island. 0 fucks of concern. Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich was first cousin to Tsar Nicholas II and a full Romanov by birth. Even fewer fucks. Vladimir Perishkovich was a far-right monarchist politician and vocal critic of Rasputin. He was not a quiet accomplice, and even bragged that he fired at least one of the shots. Sergei Sukhotin was an army officer and acquaintance of Prince Yusupov. Finally, there was Stanislav Latsovert, a military doctor. Latsovert's alleged task was to supply the poison, cyanide, for the original plan. Whether he actually did so, sabotaged the dose, or merely allowed Yusupov to believe poison had been administered remains unclear. Let's begin with the legend, because myth is always more interesting than the simple, dull truth. Rasputin was invited to the Yusupov palace under the pretense of meeting Yusupov's wife, and, as you know, horny old Grigori loved married elite women. He was served cakes and wine laced with potassium cyanide, an amount that should have been decisive. Yet Rasputin ate, drank, and conversed, and showed no obvious reaction. Whether the poison degraded, was insufficient, or was never present at all remains debated. There was also the hypothesis that Rasputin was actually immune to poison, which would have been easy to believe with Grigori's reputation as the mythical man who claimed to be able to magically cure Alexei Romanov's anemia when trained doctors could not. What mattered to the conspirators was that their idea of a clean, bloodless, violence-free solution had failed. Time to get your hands dirty, ladies. Growing increasingly alarmed, Yusupov resorted to a firearm and shot Rasputin. After the first gunshot, the group believed Rasputin was dead. The body was left on the floor while the conspirators relaxed upstairs, convinced the matter was settled. This pause is crucial to the legend. It sets up what comes next. Let me ask you a question. Who the hell murders a man and then immediately decides it would be the appropriate time for a glass of wine and a cheese board? You call yourselves assassins? First, get rid of the fucking body. Then you can settle in for some snacks and beverages. You've earned it. That's how I do it anyway. Shit, I've said too much. Yusupov then claimed that when he returned to check on the body, Rasputin suddenly revived, leapt up, and attempted to escape the palace courtyard. Perhaps, instead of being dead, he was just so bored by their fumbled attempt at homicide that he decided to take a quick nap before screwing with them a little bit more. Rasputin was said to have been struck repeatedly, variously described as being hit with fists or a blunt object, while the conspirators attempted to restrain him. This moment is the dramatic centerpiece of the myth, the unkillable mystic refusing to stay dead. Depending on the version of the story Yusupov was telling at the time, Rasputin was said to have been shot 2 or 3 times before finally being subdued. Eventually, the conspirators stated that they bound him and disposed of Rasputin in the icy Neva River. Some versions go even further, suggesting that he regained consciousness in the water, struggled beneath the ice, clawing at the ice, until he eventually drowned. This detail is responsible for some of the most enduring imagery associated with his death. Clawing hands, broken ice, and a man refusing to die even after gunfire and beatings. Even then, later accounts emphasized how reluctant Grigori seemed to be to simply end. Autopsy reports, later embellished in retellings, contributed to the impression of a man who absorbed an unreasonable amount of misfortune before finally dying. The result is a less straightforward murder and more of a kind of a historical farce, an assassination remembered not for its efficiency, but for how dramatically it deviated from the plan at every step. You've heard of vibe coding. Think of this as vibe killing. You know you won't get it right the first few times, but if you keep chugging away at it, you'll eventually murder that prick. That reputation of Rasputin as a man who was inexplicably difficult to kill was cemented immediately and became inseparable from his legend. In death, as in life, he proved uncontrollable, inconvenient, and deeply embarrassing to those who wished he would simply go away. However, just like when you get the clap, the cure takes a while. At least with murder, it doesn't burn when you pee or leave gross stains on your undies. Have I lost you yet? Come on, bear with me. We're getting to the guts of this thing, I promise. Historians, however, generally agree that what actually happened to Grigori Rasputin was far less supernatural and far more chaotic than the legend that followed. The enduring myth was shaped largely by unreliable memoirs, political self-interest, and the convenience of a good story at a moment when the Russian monarchy desperately needed one. Here's how modern scholarship tends to reconstruct the event. First, the poisoning almost certainly did not occur, at least not in any meaningful way. The story of cyanide-laced cakes and wine comes primarily from Prince Felix Yusupov's later memoirs, written years after the fact and revised multiple times. No trace of poison was found during the autopsy. Chemists have also pointed out that cyanide has a bitter taste and a noticeable smell, hard to disguise in pastries and wine. The prevailing view is that Yusupov either exaggerated the poisoning to dramatize the event or invented it entirely to explain why things went wrong. Yes, because if you didn't already look incompetent, adding extra layers of bullshit will certainly help your case. Second, Rasputin was shot, likely once at first, then again later. And this was probably decisive, meaning the battle was over. Contemporary medical reports indicate gunshot wounds consistent with fatal injury. The idea that Rasputin absorbed multiple bullets and continued fighting is largely a product of embellished retellings. More likely, the initial shot incapacitated him, but did not immediately kill him, leading the conspirators, already panicking, to escalate. This makes sense. If your intention is to kill a man and simply have it over with, you wouldn't muddy the waters with an attempted poisoning which could easily go tits up. You simply pull out your Nina and straight smoke a mother effer. At least that's how we do it on the streets of Compton. Sup, homies? Third, the drowning narrative is mostly, if not entirely, myth. The autopsy found no water in Rasputin's lungs, which strongly suggests he was already dead, or very close to it, before being thrown into the river. The famous image of Rasputin clawing at the ice belongs to legend, not evidence. It is memorable, dramatic, and almost entirely false, sort of like how my ex-wife used to say that she loved me. Modern historians are blunt on this point. The river was for disposal, not execution. The idea that Rasputin woke up in the water belongs to storytelling, not forensics. So why did the story become so exaggerated? Because it needed to, dummy. Why do you even ask these silly questions? Yusupov and the other conspirators were hoity-toity aristocrats who had bungled a political murder. Portraying Rasputin as nearly indestructible reframed incompetence as necessity. If the man was impossible to kill, then any excess force became justified. So, if you decided to Mussolini his adulterous ass, as in beat the hell out of him posthumously, you could claim the smackdown took place during, not after the murder. It also aligned neatly with Rasputin's existing reputation as a dark mystic, half monk, half demon, already feared by the public. Of course, he wasn't, in actuality, a monk or a demon. He was merely a robe-wearing, well-hung drunk who managed to screw his way through the lowest brothels and finest palaces in St. Petersburg. In short, historians believe Rasputin died the way many assassinated figures do, through confusion, poor planning, and escalating violence, not poison immunity or supernatural endurance. The real story is less theatrical, but arguably more revealing. It shows a collapsing elite, acting in desperation, and then rewriting events to make themselves look purposeful rather than panicked and pathetic. I am almost certain that if you dragged the decayed corpses of the assassins out of the ground and asked them about the death of Rasputin, they'd each lie, and lie in a different way. Their jawbones would clatter indistinctly, but you could be assured that whatever the skeletal remains were attempting to communicate, it would be more bullshit than truth. You may as well be listening to the White House press secretary talking about the economy. Rasputin's death was ultimately meaningless, because the Romanov dynasty, unbeknownst to the conspirators at the time, was only weeks away from collapse. But I understand their motivations, and fully agree Grigori Rasputin needed to go. He was an awful person, and there was public opposition to his influence over the imperial family for nearly a decade before his murder. Hell, this wasn't even the first assassination attempt. He had a wife and children living in a small village in Siberia, but he spent most of the final 10 to 12 years of his life carrying on in the most debaucherous ways in Russia's capital, ruining the reputation of the dynasty. So I guess, #fuck Rasputin.